Hey guys, thanks for joining me. I'm here at the Homestead at Flatrock. Today I'm in the corner of our garden and I have started some of the preparatory work for our, I would say, mini food forest. It won't be a full-fledged food forest, but it'll be big enough to call it mini, let's say. It's a pretty good area in terms of solar coverage. We do have a bit of wind, but luckily this part of the garden doesn't have a whole lot. So there's not a whole lot of planning in terms of windbreaks and whatnot. On this side of the garden, which is the most southerly side, we have this trellis for kiwis that was put in the spring, and this will act as a living fence to kind of separate my property on this side to the neighboring property on the other. And then we planted these apple trees, but they're going to have to move, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I present, I guess, the drone shot with overlays of the different types of fruit trees that we're planting for this area. Trying to maximize edge here is really going to be, I guess, challenging in the sense that it's a pie shape, so it has a fairly small angle, which means that this is pretty much going to be my tree line along here, which is the north side. You can see it's getting great sun today. The tree line itself doesn't actually have to move back much. I'm thinking that I might be able to just take back one layer of trees, and that'll add almost 4 feet. I am working with some constraints here. So around this area right here, where I've left basically this grass and clover and stuff to grow along here, this is basically the end of my septic field. So I really can't bring trees and stuff in over this area that's kind of left wild. It has to be left as is. But there is quite a bit of area. I mean, I have about 60 feet from here to the end of my property, and there's probably, I would say, almost 100 feet of linear space from the corner pin on my lot to this area right here, which is nestled back into the tree line, which is highly sheltered from the north wind. It's sheltered from the west wind. So this whole area will be opportunity for trees. Out here in this area where the current apple tree is, this will be somewhat of an island with lower growing shrubs, things like haskaps, potentially lupins, some rhubarb, things that grow well here, some things that are obviously native, things that will be able to add fertility to the soil like lupins. Okay, let's head on over to the drone shots, and I'll provide some commentary, I guess, on what the plan is for that area, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what was currently here, what I've done with it to prep it, and what the plan is for sheet mulching, because sheet mulching is going to be necessary here. I'm looking at mainly grasses, which are grown here, which means that in all likelihood the soil is, I guess, a bacterial soil, and I'm looking to change this to a fungally dominated soil. So we have a plan in place, but we need to get materials. So let's head on over to those drone shots. That way I can show you guys what the plan is going to look like from above, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about sheet mulching, I guess, strategy for this site. So this is the current configuration of that far west portion of the property. You can see that we have our septic leach field here, which does make it hard in terms of what we can plant, but I'm going to explore that in a later video. This is the unmanaged zone. That's really now acting as a windbreak. Likewise, this is a windbreak, and then the neighboring property actually has a fairly substantial amount of trees, which acts as a windbreak from the south and the southwest. In the current configuration, we have 2 apple trees. There's a large juniper that occurred naturally here, but there are some issues with its placement, and it's actually, from what I can tell, a male tree, and the female, which is down here, has actually died back. So this pair is not really ever going to produce anything for me, so the plan is that this is going to come out. This is our kiwi trellis, which is going to remain in place. Jerusalem artichokes were just stuck in here at the last minute in the spring because I needed a place for them. Luckily, they're actually quite prolific and they're very hardy, so I can move these anywhere really. And likewise, raspberries were kind of stuck in here. It was a place with southern coverage, and I figured it would be a decent spot because it's sheltered and the canes wouldn't need much support. This can all move. So what's my plan moving forward? So I plan on extending this blue zone up along this tree line to encompass kind of this area here, and it'll make it a little bit bigger, but I'm going to show the next image now so you can see that expansion plan. So this is a reconfigured view of that end of the property, and the red bounding box that's here now is really a representation of that expansion, and it does include this little bit. So basically, we're talking here about a plum tree, serviceberry, sea buckthorn, haskaps. Once again, sea buckthorn. We might be able to toss a haskap in here as well as apple trees. And these will all be planted in guilds, and it's likely that the guilds will include I guess these dynamic accumulators. I think that the evidence is potentially out on those, but things like comfrey and other perennial flowers and legumes like nitrogen to help build, I guess, nitrogen in the soil surrounding the trees. And the fruit-bearing trees will act as a canopy layer in the food forest. I'd really call the subcanopy because the canopy is really going to be the boreal component. And then we'll plant in layers down to, I guess, that root zone, which will be potentially plants that are intermixed along here, like maybe peanuts, things that we can actually harvest that are low to the ground. So going from plants that are low that create food to kind of high, tall plants that create food to create as much diversity as we can in that transition zone at the edge of the food forest. So this is a more zoomed in view of that area, and the little blue dots really just represent plants that are basically been chosen to be in the guild with each one of these kind of main plants: plum, serviceberry, sea buckthorns, and haskaps. And I'm thinking that these other areas may be good for rhubarb. And, you know, this is going to be one of these things where we observe and we interact and we start adding things and potentially taking things away that aren't growing well. And I think that, we may actually plant a little bit denser than this, but the idea is here is to try to maximize the edge, which is kind of, natural in this particular case. It's kind of a natural edge all the way along. But we're also going to kind of add this little island. So this will kind of be a little island here that'll add a little bit more edge. I mean, most times we have, I guess the biggest diversity in terms of, flora in, the edges where basically, the root zone plants kind of meet, the canopy plants. And that's kind of the idea, to create a load of diversity of varying heights of plants that will give us food in each layer of canopy. So starting down low with things like strawberries and rhubarb, moving up to things like haskaps and serviceberries and plums. All right, so we're back, and I think that plan is pretty clear. So the question is what was here? Okay, so there's grass here. I have no idea what kind of grass it is. It's not hay. It's a very thin blade grass that seems to grow here every year. There's also blueberry bushes that have never really ever produced anything, that were natural. My guess is that the soil's not quite right. The fact that there's grass growing here may actually indicate that this soil is heavily, I guess, bacterially dominated soil, which is not ideal for what it is that I'm looking to do. So this is all going to have to be choked out. So I'm going to need basically a layer that's going to smother this out. So the plan is to smother, but also to transition this area into more fungally dominated soil, which will be great for things like fruit trees. So in order to do that, the plan is to bring in at least a layer to 2 layers of cardboard overlapped and essentially sheet mulch the whole thing, and then cover it in about a foot of wood chips. Now the wood chips will break down slowly over time, and as I guess the life in the soil comes up and starts eating and that stuff starts decaying, it'll slowly start transitioning that soil below to a fungally dominated soil, which will make this a good area then for planting fruit trees. So the plan is to get at that this fall. So in the next segment, I'm going to show, I guess, the sheet mulching and bringing in the wood chips, so you can actually see that it's as simple as that. I'm going to bring in 2 layers of cardboard, and I'm going to start forming out where everything is going to go.